Few people knew his story. Even fewer understood why he chose to live it. From the outside, he was just a ghost in the vast, polished halls of the city's most formidable skyscraper, a man of humble silence and faded blue coveralls. He was the first to arrive each morning, a solitary figure moving through the still, vacant offices, long before the sun kissed the skyline. The fluorescent lights hummed in a sterile symphony, but Samuel Price moved to a different beat, a quiet rhythm of purpose. He was a janitor, a simple, ordinary man. Or so they thought. His hands, calloused and strong, held a mop and a bucket, but they were the same hands that years ago had signed documents worth millions. The same eyes that watched for stray coffee spills had once scanned complex financial reports, searching for patterns only he could see. But in this new world, his gaze was fixed on the mundane. He found a certain peace in the simplicity, the predictable routine that stood in stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind. His uniform was a great equalizer. It erased titles, degrees, and social status. It made him invisible, a part of the building's infrastructure, no more remarkable than the vents in the ceiling or the carpet underfoot. And for a man who had once been the focus of so much attention, a man whose every move was watched and judged, invisibility was a luxury. But the greatest luxury of all was the secret he carried, a truth so shocking it could turn the world on its head, a truth that for now remained locked away behind the plain facade of a janitor named Samuel. He was a man who had everything, and yet he had chosen to have nothing. He was a man with power beyond measure, living a life of quiet servitude. It was a choice that baffled those who knew his past, and a secret that the people in this building, a building he knew intimately, were completely blind to. Until one morning, when a loud, arrogant voice broke the silence, and his two worlds were about to collide in a spectacular, life-altering mess. Samuel's world was one of precise movements and quiet dedication. He moved with a grace that belied his age, his hands methodically wiping down every surface, ensuring each marble tile reflected the overhead light like a mirror. He wasn't just cleaning. He was caring for the building, treating it like a living, breathing entity. Every polished doorknob, every dust-free windowsill was a testament to his silent commitment. The air was a clean, crisp testament to his work, free from the lingering smells of last night's hurried dinners or forgotten perfumes. To anyone watching, it was just a job. But for Samuel, it was an escape. In this world of mop buckets and wax polish, the noise of his old life faded into a distant echo. The ringing phones, the desperate pleas of investors, the backstabbing of rivals, it all felt a million miles away. Here there were no enemies, only dust. There were no betrayals, only stubborn grime. It was simple, it was pure, and it was exactly what he needed. He paused by a large glass window, looking out at the city below. The same city where his face had once graced magazine covers, where his name was synonymous with innovation and immense wealth. He saw the taxis swarming like bees, the tiny figures of business professionals scurrying to their own destinies. He knew what it felt like to be one of them, to be driven by ambition and the relentless pursuit of more. But now his pursuit was different. He was searching for peace, for a quiet corner of the world where he could simply exist. A sudden, jarring sound from the end of the hall pulled him from his reverie. A group of young interns, laughing loudly, spilled out of an elevator, leaving a trail of crumbs from their morning pastries. Samuel sighed softly. His simple, quiet world was about to be invaded by the very people he was trying to forget. A new generation of ambition, reckless and loud, with no regard for the silent workers who made their world run. He felt a familiar knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. The quiet was ending. The quiet rhythm of Samuel's morning was shattered by the arrival of a sleek, black car at the building's entrance. From it emerged Liam Kingston, a young man who moved with the kind of entitled arrogance that only inherited wealth can buy. He clutched an overpriced latte, his eyes glued to his phone as he strode past the doorman without a glance. He was talking loudly into the speaker, his voice a jarring intrusion on the tranquil lobby. "I'm telling you, Dad, this investment is solid. The numbers don't lie. I'll be running this place by the end of the year, just watch." He gestured wildly with his free hand, nearly clipping a passing woman. His confidence was boundless, unearned, and ready to clash with the quiet efficiency of the world he was about to disrupt. Just as he rounded a corner, talking a mile a minute, Samuel pushed his cleaning cart out from a service alcove. It was an unfortunate collision of two worlds that should never have met. With a jarring thud, the cart's wheel clipped the corner and Liam, distracted by his phone, stumbled. His latte went flying, arcing through the air in a slow, dramatic arc before exploding against Samuel's chest in a hot, brown spray. The silence that followed was deafening. The sweet, pungent smell of burnt coffee filled the air. For a moment, the only thing that moved was the brown liquid dripping from Samuel's uniform onto the pristine marble floor. Liam stared at his now empty cup, a look of pure fury contorting his face. He looked up, his eyes meeting Samuel's, but he didn't see a man. He saw a nuisance, a mistake. You idiot! Liam's voice was a low growl, filled with contempt. He shoved his phone into his pocket and took a menacing step forward. This wasn't just an accident. It was a personal offense. Samuel stood there, silent and still, the hot liquid burning his skin. The true tragedy had begun. The world of the janitor and the world of the millionaire's son had just collided, and the fallout was about to be far more devastating than anyone could have predicted. Liam's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The coffee stained not only Samuel's uniform, but also Liam's pristine white shirt, a mark of his utter disgrace. He looked at the old man, his eyes blazing with a sense of righteous indignation. To him, this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of disrespect from a nobody who dared to get in his way. "You're fired," Liam snarled, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. "No, wait. Fired is too easy. I'll make sure you never get a job in this city again." Samuel stood still, his gaze lowered. He felt the weight of Liam's gaze, the contempt in his voice, and the stares of the onlookers who had now gathered, whispering amongst themselves. They were seeing a powerful young man asserting his dominance over an old, clumsy janitor. They were seeing exactly what Liam wanted them to see. Liam reached for his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling Dad's assistant. We're going to make sure your employment record is flagged in every hiring database. You'll be scrubbing toilets on the street before I'm through with you." A flicker of a smile, cold and cruel, touched Liam's lips as he spoke. He loved the feeling of having this much power, the ability to destroy a life with a single phone call. He was so caught up in the fantasy of his own might that he failed to notice the subtle, almost imperceptible change in Samuel's posture. The janitor's shoulders, which had been slumped in passive acceptance, straightened ever so slightly. Samuel finally looked up, his eyes meeting Liam's. There was no fear in them, no anger, only a deep, profound sadness. It was a look that unnerved Liam for a moment, a silent condemnation that felt more powerful than any shouting. But Liam quickly dismissed it. He was in control. He was the one with the money, the power, and the connections. He was the one who could destroy this man's life. Or so he thought. Liam hung up the phone with a flourish, a triumphant smirk on his face. "There, it's done. My father's head of HR will make sure your name is permanently removed from the system. You're not just fired, old man. You're erased." The onlookers shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the moment, the cold finality in Liam's words. They watched as two uniformed security guards, their faces grim and professional, approached Samuel. One of the guards, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke with a clipped, officious tone. "Mr. Price, we've been instructed to escort you from the premises. Your access has been revoked, effective immediately." Samuel simply nodded, his face unreadable. He had spent his life navigating high-stakes negotiations and hostile takeovers, but in this moment he felt a strange sense of calm. The humiliation was a test. a gauntlet thrown by the universe to see if he was truly committed to the simple, humble life he had chosen. His past self would have roared, would have called his own army of lawyers and executives to crush this insolent boy. But his current self, the man in the coffee-stained coveralls, simply accepted it. He knew that with a single word, he could expose Liam for the foolish boy he was. He could make one call and have Liam's life and his father's company turned inside out. He could have his job back and his revenge with a single flick of a wrist. But that would be a betrayal of his own choice, the choice to escape the very world Liam so desperately clung to. He was in this to prove something to himself, and a moment of public humiliation wasn't going to make him falter. The guard motioned toward the exit. Samuel began to walk, his steps unhurried and steady, leaving the chaos behind. He had chosen this path. He had chosen to be the janitor, and now he was going to see it through to the end. The door he was walking toward was not just an exit from a building, but a point of no return. His new reality was sealed, and there was no going back. The outside world was a sharp, cold shock. The midday sun felt harsh, and the noise of the city, which he had once found so exhilarating, was now just a chaotic roar. He clutched his small, worn-out duffel bag, the only thing he had brought to the city besides the clothes on his back. For a man who had once owned a fleet of luxury cars, a simple bus ride felt like a journey to a foreign land. He rode in silence, a ghost among the commuters, invisible to everyone except the one person whose name was now permanently etched in his memory, Liam Kingston. His sanctuary was a small, two-room apartment on the city's outskirts. It was a world away from the penthouse he had once called home. A world of muted colors, second-hand furniture, and the constant hum of a noisy refrigerator. There were no assistants to fetch his coffee, no chefs to prepare his meals. Here in this quiet, solitary space, he was just a man. He took off his coffee-stained uniform and draped it over a chair. It was more than a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of his experiment, an experiment that had just been violently interrupted. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under his weight. A wave of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, washed over him. This was the fall. It wasn't about the money. He could buy and sell this building 100 times over. It was about the loss of his quiet life, his simple routine. He had sacrificed everything for the sake of anonymity, and in one careless, arrogant moment, it had all been taken from him. He had chosen this path, but the sting of public humiliation was a price he had not anticipated. In this moment of profound solitude, the reality of his situation pressed down on him with crushing weight. He wasn't just unemployed. He was an outcast in the very world he had chosen to embrace. The path he had so carefully laid out was now filled with thorns. The silence of the apartment, once so peaceful, now felt like a lonely echo of his own isolation. For the first time since he began this journey, he felt the cold hand of helplessness reach out and touch him. The next morning, Samuel walked aimlessly through the city, a ghost among the rush-hour crowds. He found himself at a small, unassuming cafe, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the smiles were genuine. He ordered a simple black coffee, his last few dollars clutched in his hand. The woman behind the counter, a kind-faced lady with laughter lines around her eyes, noticed the tired slump of his shoulders. She was a silent observer of the city's human stories, and she could see a heavy weight on this man. As Samuel reached for his wallet, he found his hand shaking slightly. The weight of his fall, the sense of failure, was still fresh. The woman, whose name tag read Eleanor, watched him with a gentle gaze. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just poured his coffee, slid it across the counter, and then, with a quiet, knowing smile, she pushed a small plate of warm, homemade muffins toward him. "On the house," she said softly, her voice like a warm blanket. "You look like you could use something to remind you of the good in the world. It's still out there, you know." Samuel looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He was so used to seeing people's faces filled with contempt or indifference. The genuine kindness in her eyes was a sudden, jarring contrast. It was a simple act, a small plate of muffins, but to him it felt like an entire banquet. It was a reminder that his self-imposed experiment was not a total failure. The world he had chosen, the world of ordinary people, was filled with a humanity that money could never buy. He managed a small, grateful nod, the first genuine expression on his face in days. He took the coffee and a muffin and found a quiet corner to sit. The warmth of the mug in his hands, the sweet taste of the muffin, it was a small moment of solace. It wasn't about the food. It was about the kindness. In that brief interaction, he found a tiny flicker of hope. He realized that the test wasn't about whether he could endure humiliation, but whether he could find strength in the small, beautiful moments of human connection. The light had finally broken through the clouds. The small glimmer of hope that Elena had offered was about to be put to the ultimate test. Samuel's next few days were a blur of frustration and dead ends. He walked from one building to another, from one corporate office to the next, his resume now a useless piece of paper. He was met with the same cold, polite rejection every time. A friendly receptionist would take his information, only to have her smile fade as she checked her computer screen. They would apologize, their voices flat and impersonal, saying that his name was not in the system, or that their company was not hiring at this time. It was a modern-day ghosting. The world was telling him that he simply did not exist. The invisible wall that Liam Kingston had promised was now a suffocating reality. It wasn't just about being fired. It was about being erased from the professional landscape he had worked so hard to enter. The very system he had once helped to build was now being used against him. He felt the familiar weight of helplessness return, a crushing emptiness that made his bones ache with fatigue. As he was leaving yet another building, a man with a tired face and a worn uniform sat on a bench, eating a sandwich. He watched Samuel with a knowing look. "It's a tough day out there, isn't it?" the man said, his voice raspy from years of talking through cigarette smoke. Samuel was surprised. Most people looked through him, not at him. He simply nodded. The man took a slow bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. "I saw you at the Winston Tower. That place is a shark tank. I saw what that kid did to you. Word gets around." He extended a hand, his face creased in a gesture of genuine sympathy. "I'm Frank. Look, I don't know what happened, but I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in. I heard a company downtown needs a temporary hand to clean up a warehouse. It's off the books, just a couple of days' work. No questions asked." Frank's offer was a small, quiet act of kindness, a lifeline in a sea of impersonal rejection. It wasn't a career-defining job, but it was work. And for Samuel, it was a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, humanity could shine through. For every door that had been slammed in his face, a small window had just opened. Frank's offer was a small, flickering candle in the crushing darkness of Samuel's predicament, but it was a candle all the same. The warehouse job was located in an industrial wasteland on the city's outskirts, a place where the air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and the constant groan of heavy machinery. The warehouse itself was a cold, cavernous space, a monument to commercial inefficiency. He spent his days hauling mountains of dusty, forgotten boxes, each one feeling like 100 pounds of dead weight on his shoulders. The work was mindless and physically brutal, a far cry from the intellectual sparring he was used to. His hands, once accustomed to the soft leather of a boardroom chair, a fountain pen, or the fine grain of polished mahogany, were now raw and blistered, a testament to his new, unforgiving reality. He ate his lunch alone, a simple sandwich and a bottle of water, sitting on a pallet of discarded goods. The other workers were a silent, weary army, their faces etched with the same exhaustion. They didn't talk to each other. They just worked. Their world was one of transactional labor, where every hour was $1 and every motion was for a purpose. Samuel felt the profound weight of his new existence. His choice to be invisible had been romanticized, but this was the cold, harsh reality of it. He was a ghost in this world as well, but now he was a ghost with a raw, throbbing body and a deep sense of loneliness. One afternoon, as he wiped the sweat from his brow, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Frank, holding 2 steaming paper cups. "You look like you've been through a war, son," Frank said, his voice softer now. He handed Samuel a cup, its warmth a soothing contrast to the cold air. "Just a little something to get you through the rest of the day. A man's got to have his dignity, you know. Doesn't matter if you're moving papers or moving boxes. It's how you do it that counts." Samuel took a sip of the bitter coffee. The gesture was simple, but its impact was immense. Frank didn't know his past, his wealth, or his secret. He just saw a man who was struggling, a man who needed a moment of compassion. This small act of kindness was a lifeline. It was a reminder that even in the most unforgiving environments, humanity could thrive. Frank, a man of simple means and a weathered face, was his unexpected anchor in this new, turbulent sea. He wasn't offering a job, but a shared moment of solidarity, a connection that money could not buy. This small gesture was enough to remind Samuel why he embarked on this journey in the first place, reinforcing that true value was not in the accumulation of things, but in the enduring spirit of the human connection. Days bled into weeks, each one a relentless cycle of physical labor and quiet solitude. Samuel's body adapted to the work, the ache in his muscles becoming a familiar companion. But the physical pain was a dull echo compared to the mental and emotional strain. It was a constant battle between the man he was and the man he used to be. The polished marble floors of the Winston Tower, the hum of the air conditioning, the crisp, tailored suits, these were a world away, a memory that felt like it belonged to a different life. One evening, as he took a break in the small, cluttered break room, a news report played on a grainy television mounted in the corner. The screen was a window back into his old life, a painful reminder of the world he was now an outcast from. The reporter was gushing about a new young leader shaking up the business world. And then the face of Liam Kingston flashed onto the screen, smiling broadly, a glass of champagne in hand. He was at a lavish charity gala, surrounded by influential figures and flashing cameras. A bold new vision for the future of the Kingston Group, the reporter said, her voice full of fawning admiration. "Mr. Kingston is proving that he's more than just a name. He's a force to be reckoned with, taking the company in a fresh, new direction." The words were like daggers. A fresh, new direction was a direct result of Samuel's departure. He watched as Liam spoke into a microphone, his arrogance now cloaked in the polished veneer of media-trained confidence. It was a bitter sight. While Liam was celebrating his unearned victory, Samuel was in a dusty room, his hands caked with grime, his dreams of a quiet life crushed under the weight of an unfair public narrative. He felt a hot, familiar pang of anger. It was the same anger he had felt a lifetime ago when a competitor had tried to force him into a bad deal. It was the impulse to fight, to remind the world that he was not a man to be trifled with, just as the feeling of helpless rage threatened to overwhelm him. A young co-worker named Maria, a woman who had worked silently alongside him for days, walked over. She was holding 2 bottles of cold water. "You've been at that stain on the floor for an hour," she said, her voice soft and knowing. "Some things just don't come out. Sometimes you got to know when to let go." She didn't know his story, but her words were a profound message. She was talking about a stain, but she was also talking about the past, about the bitterness and the anger he was clinging to. She handed him one of the bottles. He looked at her, and in her tired eyes he saw not pity, but understanding. Her small act of kindness, a cold bottle of water, and a simple piece of advice, was enough to quench the fire of his rage. It was a small but vital victory over the darkness, a quiet triumph of humanity that reminded him that he was on a different path now. A path where the true reward was not a front-page headline, but a moment of genuine human connection. The silence of Samuel's small apartment was a stark contrast to the chaos of his mind. He was sitting in the dark, the faint light from a street lamp filtering through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stillness. He had a glass of water in his hand, but he wasn't thirsty. He was simply holding on to something, anything, to ground himself. His old life, the one he had meticulously crafted and then just as meticulously dismantled, felt like a distant, impossible dream. He remembered the late nights in his penthouse, the city lights below him like a sea of diamonds, the soft hum of his expensive air purifier, the deep silence of a room where every sound was by his design. Now the quiet was an empty vacuum, a space for his doubt to rush in and fill every corner. Was it a foolish choice? Was his experiment in humility simply an act of supreme arrogance in disguise? Had he, in his pursuit of a quiet life, forgotten the very nature of the world he was trying to escape? The answer felt like a crushing weight. He had thought he could simply walk away, that he could shed his skin and become someone else. But Liam Kingston, a boy who knew nothing of him, had shown him the brutal truth. You couldn't walk away. The old world would find you, it would hunt you down, and it would remind you with brutal force who you were and who you were not. The memory of Liam's smirk, the cold contempt in his eyes, was a wound that refused to heal. He wasn't a janitor. Not really. He was a millionaire, a man with a secret. But in this moment, in this silent, dark room, the money felt like a useless, empty promise. It couldn't buy back his peace. It couldn't erase the memory of public humiliation. It couldn't mend his broken spirit. He felt a profound sense of helplessness, a weakness that was far more painful than the physical ache in his muscles. He had always been in control. He had always been the one making the rules. But in this new world he was powerless. He was a pawn in someone else's game. He buried his face in his hands, a gesture of defeat. He had always been so strong, so confident, so sure of himself. But now he felt like a fragile old man, battered and broken by a world that had no regard for him. The feeling of vulnerability was a raw new emotion, a feeling that a man like him had never allowed himself to feel. The tears that welled up in his eyes were not tears of pain or anger, but tears of profound loneliness. He was a ghost in this world, and for the first time the solitude felt less like a luxury and more like a punishment. The warehouse floor felt colder, the metal of the boxes heavier. Samuel's mind was a swirling vortex of regret and self-recrimination. He was doing his job, but his movements lacked the quiet, focused precision they once had. His attention was elsewhere, lost in a painful replay of Liam's mocking words and his own helpless silence. He misjudged a corner, and a stack of boxes teetered dangerously before Frank, with surprising speed, reached out and steadied them. "Hey, careful now," Frank said, his voice low and concerned. "A little distracted today, aren't we?" Samuel muttered an apology, but Frank just shook his head. He leaned against a pallet, pulling a half-smoked cigarette from behind his ear. He didn't light it, just held it, a familiar prop for his moments of reflection. "You know, this job is simple, but it's not for the simple-minded," Frank began, his gaze fixed on a far corner of the warehouse. "It's about showing up. It's about putting one foot in front of the other, even when you feel like you're walking through mud." He turned to look at Samuel, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that went far beyond the warehouse walls. "I've seen a lot of guys come through here, guys with big dreams, guys with broken hearts. This place, it's a graveyard for ambition if you let it be. But it's also a second chance. It all depends on how you see it. Are you a janitor because you have to be? Or are you a janitor because you choose to be?" The question hit Samuel with the force of a punch. He had chosen to be a janitor. It was a choice, a powerful, deliberate choice. But in the past few days, with every closed door and every act of contempt, he had forgotten that. He had begun to see himself as a victim, a man forced into this life by circumstance, rather than a man who had chosen it. Frank's words were a simple truth that cut through the fog of his self-pity. This was a test of his resolve, not his luck. He looked at his blistered hands, then at the mountain of boxes still waiting to be moved. The physical labor was just the shell. The real work was the inner battle, the fight to hold on to his purpose when everything around him was telling him to give up. He looked at Frank, a man who had likely faced 1,000 more hardships than he had, and saw a quiet dignity, a resilience that had nothing to do with money or power. He saw a man who had found his purpose in showing up, and in that simple, shared moment of understanding, Samuel felt a flicker of his old strength return. He wasn't weak, he was just lost. And Frank, his unlikely guide, had just given him the compass he needed. The warehouse had a different feel to it now. It was still cold and dirty, but Samuel was no longer just a victim of its grim reality. He was an observer, a student. He watched Frank, the way he meticulously organized the tools, the small, satisfied smile he gave when a job was done right. He saw the quiet determination in Maria, the way she could handle the heavy equipment with a graceful ease that defied her small frame. He saw the dignity in their labor, the pride they took in a job well done, regardless of how menial it seemed to the outside world. This was their wealth, not in money, but in integrity and hard-earned pride. He found himself thinking of his own son, of Liam, and the world he inhabited. A world of polished surfaces and empty victories. He remembered a time years ago when Liam was just a teenager. Samuel had given him a brand new, expensive car for his 16th birthday. He had hoped it would be a symbol of his love and his success. But Liam had barely looked at it, his eyes already on the next big thing. A new phone, a new game console, a new title to chase. He saw now that he had been so focused on giving his son everything that he had forgotten to teach him the value of anything. He had given him a world without want, and in doing so, he had created a world without purpose. This new reality, the grime, the sweat, the silent camaraderie of the warehouse workers, was a harsh mirror. It showed him the man he had become and the man he had failed to raise. The thought was a painful one. He had built an empire, a legacy of power and influence, but in the process he had created a void in his own family. He felt a profound sense of sadness, not for himself, but for Liam, for the boy who had never learned the meaning of a hard day's work, the boy who had never understood the quiet dignity of a man like Frank or a woman like Maria. He looked at his own calloused hands, hands that had built an empire from the ground up, and now here they were, moving boxes. But for the first time, he didn't see a punishment. He saw a lesson. He had lost his job, his peace, and his anonymity. But in the process, he had found something far more valuable. He had found a new perspective. He saw the world from the bottom up, from the ground floor of a warehouse to the penthouse office where his son was making his name. He was seeing the human cost of the world he had created, and in doing so, he was finally ready to face the man who had torn his life apart, while Samuel was finding solace in the quiet dignity of his new world. In another part of the city, Liam Kingston was stewing in a restless state of paranoia. The initial high of his victory had worn off, replaced by a growing anxiety. He couldn't shake the image of the old janitor's eyes, so full of quiet sadness, so devoid of fear. It was a look that haunted him, a silent judgment that felt more powerful than any shouting. He found himself constantly checking his father's schedule, listening in on conversations, terrified that his act of spite would reach the ears of the one man he truly feared, his father. Arthur Kingston, Liam's father, had a reputation for being ruthless in business, but he was a man of strict moral codes. He had built his empire on a foundation of respect for hard work and loyalty, a lesson he had tried and failed to instill in his son. Liam knew that if his father found out about the incident with the janitor, there would be hell to pay. Arthur would see Liam's actions not as a display of strength, but as a fatal flaw in character, the very thing that could cost Liam his position in the company. Driven by a desperate need to erase any trace of his mistake, Liam used his connections to get access to the building's security footage. He spent hours combing through the recordings, not to see what the janitor did, but to ensure that no one else had witnessed the humiliation. He wanted to make sure the janitor was not only gone, but forgotten. He hired a private investigator, a man who worked in the shadows, with a simple directive: find the janitor, confirm he was out of the city, and make sure he never came back. It was a cold, calculated move, a full-scale assault on a man he believed was nothing more than an insignificant piece of a building. The escalation was silent but deadly. Samuel, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the net closing in around him. He was focused on his work, on the small moments of human kindness, on the strength he found in his newfound perspective. But the quiet world he had built was about to be rocked to its core. A subtle shift in the winds was coming. The private investigator, a man with a cold, relentless gaze, was already on the case, tracking Samuel's every move. He found Samuel's old apartment building, spoke to the landlord, and was now just 2 steps behind, a silent hunter closing in on his prey. The stakes had just been raised. It was no longer about a job. It was about the very life he had chosen to lead. Liam's actions had turned his humble experiment into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, a game that Samuel didn't even know he was playing. The true test of his resolve was about to begin. The calm was over. The storm had finally arrived. The world of private investigation was a cold, lonely one, a world of waiting in cars and staring at grainy photographs. Mark, the investigator Liam had hired, was a master of it. He was a man of few words and fewer emotions, a machine programmed for one purpose: to find his target and confirm the facts. His assignment was simple: locate a janitor named Samuel Price, confirm his employment status, and find out if he had left the city. Liam's fear was that the janitor would find his way to Arthur Kingston, and Mark's job was to ensure that never happened. Mark worked with a quiet, unsettling efficiency. He started at the Winston Tower, moving through the back alleys and talking to the support staff with a disarming politeness that masked his true intentions. He found a few people who remembered the incident, but their descriptions were vague. He then tracked Samuel's last known address from his employment file, a small, unassuming building on the city's outskirts. He sat in his car across the street, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. He was just a shadow in the afternoon light, but his gaze was sharp and focused. He watched as people came and went, their lives an open book to him. He saw a delivery man, a mother with 2 small children, an elderly woman walking her dog. And then he saw him, Samuel, emerging from the building, a paper bag in his hand. Mark's hand went to the ignition, his eyes narrowing. This was it, the moment of confirmation. But just as he was about to start the car, Samuel turned and walked toward a small park. He sat on a bench, opened his bag, and took out a simple sandwich. Mark watched through his binoculars, a professional detachment in his eyes. He saw the way Samuel ate, the slow, deliberate bites, the peaceful look on his face. It was not the face of a man who was running or a man who was plotting revenge. It was the face of a man who had made a conscious choice to live a simple life. The contradiction was jarring, but Mark quickly dismissed it. His job was not to understand the man, but to confirm his existence and report back to Liam. The moment of near contact passed. Mark simply documented Samuel's location and the mundane nature of his life. He took a few pictures and typed up a brief report. He was confident that Samuel was no threat. He was just a simple janitor who was down on his luck. But what he didn't see was the subtle change in Samuel's expression as he sat there. A growing sense of being watched, a feeling that the silence around him was not as empty as it seemed. The world he had left behind was not just watching him on a TV screen. It was getting closer. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was just a street away, and soon it was going to knock on his door. Liam Kingston was sitting in his spacious corner office, the panoramic view of the city offering no solace to the storm brewing inside him. He was a man drowning in his own paranoia. The private investigator's report lay on his desk, a single, concise document that should have put his mind at ease. It confirmed that Samuel Price was working as a day laborer in a downtown warehouse, living in a cheap, unassuming apartment. The report concluded that the man was no threat. But for Liam, the absence of a threat was, in itself, the greatest threat of all. He couldn't reconcile the old man's quiet, accepting eyes with the pathetic life the report described. It was too simple, too perfect. A mind like Liam's, so twisted by privilege and suspicion, could not comprehend a person choosing a life of honest humility. He saw it as a mask, a grand theatrical performance. The janitor was either an investor sent by a rival company to dig up dirt, or even worse, a man his father had secretly hired to test him, a twisted game designed to expose his flaws. The thought sent a jolt of panic through him. Liam picked up his phone and dialed his father's number. "Dad, it's Liam. I was just checking in," he said, his voice a smooth, confident mask. "Listen, I've been going over the new security protocols. I think we have a serious issue with our hiring process. There are too many loopholes. I've noticed a few people who, well, they just don't fit the profile. It feels like we're opening ourselves up to sabotage." On the other end of the line, Arthur Kingston listened, a deep, resonant voice giving a short, clipped answer. "Sabotage? What are you talking about, son?" Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, but he pushed on, a cold calculation in his tone. "Just a gut feeling. I think we have a mole, someone on the inside, maybe even in the cleaning crew trying to get information. I've got my own people looking into it, just to be sure. I don't want you to worry about it, but I think it's a good time to make a clean sweep. Just a general restructuring." He was planting the seed of suspicion, subtly connecting his firing of the janitor to a larger, more sinister plot. He was turning his act of petty cruelty into a moment of corporate foresight, and in doing so, he was ensuring that Samuel Price wouldn't just be out of a job. He'd be a person of interest, a name in a file, a potential threat. The stakes had been raised. The chess pieces were moving, and Samuel had no idea he was even on the board. Liam was not just a villain anymore. He was a manipulator, a man who would use his power to destroy anyone who stood in the way of his ambition. The silent war had just begun, and this time Liam was playing to win. Samuel's temporary work in the warehouse came to a sudden and perplexing halt. He arrived one morning ready to face the day's work, but the foreman, a large man with a permanent scowl, simply shook his head. "Sorry, pal. The gig's off. No more temporary labor. Something about a new policy from the higher-ups. Said they want to streamline the operations." His words were clipped, his gaze avoiding Samuel's. It was a lie, a flimsy excuse that neither of them believed. Samuel felt a familiar chill. This wasn't a random setback. This was too clean, too organized. The invisible hand of Liam Kingston had just reached into his humble world and turned off the lights. He walked out of the warehouse, the heavy door closing behind him with a final, echoing thud. The world outside felt a little colder, a little more hostile. The city, which he had once seen as a testament to human ambition, now felt like a predator. The truth was a crushing weight. His humble existence, the very life he had chosen, was now a target. His quiet journey had been a fool's errand, a self-imposed prison from which he could never truly escape. He felt a wave of despair so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. He sat on a park bench, watching the leaves fall, each one a tiny, fragile metaphor for his life. The temptation to reach for his phone, to make the call that would end all of this, was a physical ache in his chest. He could send one email, make one phone call, and the entire Kingston group would be shaken to its core. He could expose Liam for the coward he was. He could destroy the legacy his father had built, and he could have his old life back. The power was right there, a small black device in his pocket. It was the easy way out. It was the logical choice. But it would be a betrayal of every single thing he had come to believe in. As he sat there, a young boy on a bicycle, a bike far too big for him, wobbled down the path. He lost control, tumbling to the ground. A woman ran to help him, a look of panic on her face, but the boy with a determined scowl simply stood up, dusted himself off, and looked at his bike. He didn't cry. He just got back on, his small legs pumping with a stubborn resolve. He wobbled again, but this time he didn't fall. He kept going, a small, triumphant figure on a path that was far too big for him. Samuel watched him, and a slow, knowing smile touched his lips. The boy's actions were a mirror of his own struggle. The easy thing to do would have been to give up, to throw the bike to the side and cry. But he didn't. He got back on. He kept going. He chose to fight. And in that small, powerful moment, Samuel felt his own inner strength return. He wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to betray the man he had chosen to become. He was going to face this new, relentless attack head-on. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to stand his ground. Samuel walked through the city with a newfound sense of purpose. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet anger. He was done being a ghost. He was done being a victim. He had chosen this path, and now he was going to defend it with everything he had. The boy on the bicycle had reminded him that the only way to win a struggle is to get back on the bike, no matter how many times you fall. He knew what he had to do. He had to use the one thing Liam Kingston didn't know he had, his mind. He went to a small public library, a place he hadn't visited since his college days. He sat down at a computer, his fingers still raw from the warehouse work, flying across the keyboard with a speed that belied his appearance. He was no longer a janitor. He was a detective, a man on a mission. He searched for news about the Kingston Group, for information about new policies, new hires, anything that would give him a clue. He was looking for Liam's hand in the shadows, a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead him to the source of his misery. He found it in a small, obscure article in a corporate trade magazine. The article talked about a new initiative by Liam Kingston to streamline operations and minimize risk by re-evaluating the company's hiring practices. It was corporate jargon, but Samuel, with his decades of experience, could read between the lines. He saw the cold, calculated manipulation behind the words. Liam hadn't just had him fired. He had used his firing as an example, a public lesson to show his power and ruthlessness. He had turned a petty act of revenge into a corporate strategy, a move that would not only destroy Samuel, but also impress his father. Samuel felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. Liam wasn't just a spoiled boy. He was a manipulator, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. He was playing a game of corporate chess, and Samuel was just a pawn. But Liam had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated his opponent. He had forgotten that a pawn in the right hands could become a queen. He closed the computer, his mind already racing. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the warehouse. He had to talk to Frank and Maria. He had to tell them the truth. Not about his wealth, not about his past, but about the conspiracy that was threatening their jobs. He had to use his knowledge to fight back, not for himself, but for the people who had shown him so much kindness. The true struggle wasn't about him. It was about the people he had come to care about. He was no longer a lone ghost fighting for his survival. He was a man with a purpose, a man with a plan. He was ready to fight back. The warehouse felt different this time. It wasn't a place of quiet refuge or grueling labor. It was a battlefield. Samuel walked through the heavy doors, his gaze steady, his mind focused. He found Frank and Maria sitting in the break room, their faces etched with the same weary lines he had seen on all the others who had been let go. They looked up, surprised to see him. There was a mix of confusion and pity in their eyes. "What are you doing here, man?" Frank asked, a genuine concern in his voice. "You shouldn't be here." The boss said it was a new policy. "They're running a tight ship now." Samuel pulled up a chair and sat down, a quiet, intense energy radiating from him. He looked at them, not as co-workers, but as his allies. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the quiet resignation they felt. He knew he had to choose his words carefully. "That's what they want you to believe," Samuel began, his voice low and steady. "It's not a new policy, it's a purge. A calculated move to get rid of anyone who they see as a potential liability. They're calling it streamlining operations, but what they're really doing is consolidating power." Maria scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. What are you talking about, Samuel? It's just how things are. We're expendable. That's the way the world works. Not this time, Samuel insisted, his gaze locking with hers. This is different. This is personal. I was the first one fired because of a petty act of revenge. And now they're coming for everyone who was a part of the old system. They're not just trying to fire you. They're trying to erase you. He then explained what he had found in his research, translating the corporate jargon into a language they could understand. He talked about streamlining as a cover for a hostile takeover of the workforce. He spoke of re-evaluating hiring policies as a way to blacklist people who are seen as a threat. He was not just a janitor anymore. He was a leader, a man who was using his knowledge to fight back for the people who had shown him kindness. Frank listened, his face slowly changing from skepticism to a deep, simmering anger. He looked at Maria, and she looked back at him. They had worked their entire lives, always believing that their dignity was in their hard work, but this was a different kind of fight. This was a war against their existence, against their right to earn a living. So what do we do? Maria asked, her voice a low whisper. We're just janitors. What can we do against a guy with a last name like Kingston? Samuel finally smiled, a cold, hard glint in his eyes. We don't fight him on his terms. We fight him on ours. The janitor's world is one of silence and anonymity. And in that silence, we can do more damage than he could ever imagine. We fight with knowledge, with truth, and with the one thing he can't buy, respect. It was the beginning of their new plan. Samuel was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Frank, for Maria, and for everyone who had ever been humiliated and discarded by the powerful. The battle had just begun. Their plan was a quiet symphony of strategy and precision. For the next few nights, Samuel, Frank, and Maria moved like ghosts through the city's back alleys and service corridors. They were no longer just laborers. They were a team of corporate spies, using their humble status as a form of armor. While Liam was at lavish dinners and corporate galas, his mind consumed by paranoia and self-congratulation, they were in the heart of his empire, operating in the shadows. They weren't looking for revenge. They were looking for truth. They were looking for the evidence that would expose Liam's conspiracy and restore their dignity. Samuel used his knowledge of the city's corporate networks to find the digital trail Liam had left behind. He knew where Liam would hide a document, a communication, a piece of evidence. He knew that a man like Liam, who was so used to having his way, would make a mistake. Frank and Maria, meanwhile, used their knowledge of the physical world. They knew every service elevator, every hidden closet, every back alley. They were the eyes and ears of the operation, providing the cover and the access that Samuel needed. Their search led them to a small, unassuming office building, an old-school data center that the Kingston Group still used for its legacy documents. It was a place Liam had likely overlooked, too busy with the polished digital future to care about the dusty past. They slipped in late at night, their movements silent, their purpose clear. Samuel, with his calm, focused demeanor, went to work. He knew the old filing systems, the apathetic security, the predictable patterns of a world Liam thought was beneath him. He was looking for something specific, a document, a memo, an email that would directly link Liam to the restructuring of the hiring process. He found it on a forgotten server, buried under a mountain of old files. It was an email from Liam to a mid-level HR manager. The subject line was innocuous, but the contents were a different story. It was a series of chilling instructions, a step-by-step guide to blacklist specific names and create a new risk assessment policy that would make it impossible for anyone with a spotty record to be hired again. At the end of the email, there was a single chilling line: "Make sure the janitor's name is the first to go." Samuel read the words, his heart pounding in his chest. It was all there. The cold, calculated cruelty. The proof he needed, he had it. The triumph was palpable. He had faced his greatest fears, he had endured public humiliation, and he had come out on top. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The stage was set. The final confrontation was about to begin. The janitor had a secret, and now he had the evidence to back it up. He was no longer a victim. He was a force to be reckoned with. The meeting was set in a quiet, unassuming cafe, a world away from the gilded halls of the Kingston Group. Liam walked in, a look of impatience on his face. He had received a cryptic email asking for a private meeting to discuss a matter of company security. He expected a subordinate, a fearful employee with a complaint. He did not expect to see the very man he had tried to erase from existence. "You?" Liam sneered, a flicker of fear in his eyes, quickly masked by contempt. "How did you get this number?" "I told you, you're done here." "I've made sure of it." Samuel did not respond with anger. He just looked at him, with the same quiet sadness he had in the lobby. He slid a small, old photograph across the table. It was a picture of a younger Arthur Kingston, Liam's father, standing beside a younger, smiling Samuel. They were both in their early 20s, their arms around each other, a look of youthful ambition in their eyes. Liam's face went white. He looked at the photo, then at Samuel, his mind reeling. "My name is Samuel Price," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. "And your father and I, we started this company together. We built it from the ground up with our own hands. The revelation was a hammer blow. Liam's carefully constructed world of power and privilege came crashing down around him. He had spent his life thinking his father's wealth was his birthright, a gift from a man who had everything. But this man, this janitor, was the one who had helped build it. And my father and I," Samuel continued, his voice now laced with a cold, quiet authority, "we made a pact. We would always remember where we came from. We would never forget the people who make this world run. The janitors, the security guards, the assistants, they are the true foundation of this company. They are the ones who deserve our respect." He then slid a second item across the table. It was a digital copy of the email, the one that proved Liam had used his power to destroy an innocent man. Liam looked at the screen, a look of pure terror on his face. He was no longer the powerful aggressor. He was just a boy, caught in a lie, a boy who had finally come face to face with the consequences of his own arrogance. The world he had created was about to crumble, and the man who was going to crumble it was the very man he had tried to erase. Liam's face was a study in pure, unadulterated terror. He stared at the email on the screen, then at the old photograph, and finally at Samuel. The man he had so easily dismissed, so callously humiliated, was not only the co-founder of his father's company, but also the living embodiment of everything Liam was not. The shame was a physical blow, a hot, searing heat that spread across his face. You set me up," Liam stammered, his voice a pathetic whisper. "This is a joke. You're playing a game." Samuel's voice was calm, almost heartbreakingly so. "This isn't a game, Liam, this is a lesson. A lesson you've needed to learn your entire life." He looked at the email on the screen, a look of profound sadness in his eyes. "You didn't just fire me. You tried to ruin me. You tried to erase me. And why? Because I spilled a cup of coffee. Because I was in your way." Liam shook his head, his hands trembling. He looked around the cafe, as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. He was cornered, exposed. "My father, he'll never believe this. You don't have any proof. This is doctored." Samuel just smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Your father has seen it. This morning. He knows the truth. The only person you're fooling is yourself." The words were a final crushing blow. Liam's shoulders slumped in defeat. The arrogance, the contempt, the endless entitlement, it all melted away, revealing the terrified, vulnerable boy underneath. He had been so sure of his power, so convinced that his wealth was his armor, but in this moment it was his greatest weakness. He looked at Samuel, not with hatred, but with a dawning sense of respect and a deep, gnawing fear. He finally understood the gravity of his actions and the irreversible consequences. The battle was over. The victory was Samuel's, not with a phone call or a press conference, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen to be honest, and in doing so had won everything. The silence in Arthur Kingston's office was heavier than any sound. Arthur, a man who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat behind his desk, his face a mask of profound disappointment. He had the email open on his screen, the one Samuel had sent him moments ago, the one that proved his son's duplicity. Liam stood before him, his head bowed in shame, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The cocky arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated look. Arthur's gaze was fixed on Samuel, who stood to the side, a quiet witness to the fallout. I'm so sorry, Samuel, Arthur said, his voice raw with a mix of anger and shame. I can't believe he would do this. He was supposed to be my legacy. He was supposed to be better. Liam finally looked up, his voice a choked whisper. Dad, I was just trying to show you. I was trying to prove I could run this place. I was scared. Arthur's voice was a low growl of pure fury. You used your power to destroy an honest man's life because of a simple mistake. You used corporate policy to get your revenge on a man who spilled your coffee. That's not being scared, Liam. That's being a coward. Arthur's words were a final, crushing blow. Liam's eyes filled with tears, a mix of shame and regret. He had gambled with his father's trust, and he had lost everything. But the true defeat was not in the loss of his father's trust. It was in the realization that the man he had wronged was the living embodiment of everything he had failed to become. The man he had tried to erase was a living monument to his own failures. The defeat was complete. The obstacle was overcome. Arthur turned to Samuel, his eyes filled with a deep sense of respect. Samuel, I don't know what you want from me, but whatever it is, it's yours. The company, it's yours. Samuel just shook his head, a small, sad smile on his lips. I don't want the company, Arthur. I want a man to face the consequences of his actions. I want him to understand the value of a single day's work. I want him to understand that the people who clean the floors of this building are worth more than all the money in the world. Samuel walked out of the Kingston Group building a free man, his head held high. The shackles of his past, the weight of his secret, were finally gone. He didn't have a job, and he didn't have a company, but he had something far more valuable, a profound sense of peace. The very building that had been a symbol of his imprisonment was now a monument to his liberation. The security guards at the door, the same ones who had escorted him from the premises, now looked at him with a new sense of respect. Their faces filled with a dawning realization of who he was. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, he saw them. Frank and Maria were sitting on a bench, a silent, anxious look on their faces. They saw him and stood up, their eyes filled with a nervous hope. What happened? Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Did you fix it? Samuel just smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up his face. It's over, he said simply. He won't be bothering anyone again. Your jobs are safe. Everyone's jobs are safe. Frank let out a long, slow breath of relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He reached out and placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, his grip firm and warm. We can't thank you enough, man. You saved us. You saved our lives. Samuel shook his head. No, you saved me. You showed me that a man's worth is not in the size of his bank account, but in the size of his heart. You taught me that true wealth is not in the things you own, but in the people you know. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to Frank. It was a check, a significant amount that would change his life forever. This is a loan, Samuel said, a mischievous glint in his eye. A loan to start your own business. To show the world that a man like you, with a heart of gold, can achieve anything. And this, he said, pulling out a second check for Maria, is for you. A down payment on a house, a reward for your courage. They stared at the checks, their eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. The reward was not a company, not a title, but the look on their faces, the look of hope, of triumph, of a new beginning. The reward was a small act of kindness, a testament to the fact that the real treasure was not in a bank, but in the human heart. And so, the quiet janitor walked away from the building that had once been his prison, his silent triumph echoing in the halls. He had faced his greatest fears, not with the armor of his wealth, but with the simple, unshakable courage of his character. He had proven that true power isn't about the money in your bank account, but the compassion in your heart. It's not about the title on your business card, but the respect you earn from the people who know your true worth. This story is a reminder that we are all, in a way, like Samuel. We are all living with a secret. The secret that we are more than our titles, more than our circumstances, more than the failures that define us. The world will try to put us in a box, to label us as a janitor, a failure, a nobody. But it is in our moments of greatest weakness that our true strength is revealed. The quiet dignity of a man like Samuel, the simple kindness of a woman like Maria, the quiet resilience of a man like Frank. These are the things that truly matter. These are the things that can change the world. The ultimate triumph is not in getting a new job or in becoming rich. The ultimate triumph is in remaining true to yourself, in refusing to let the world turn you into something you're not. It's in finding the courage to be kind in a world that is so often cruel. It's in seeing the humanity in others, even when they fail to see it in you. It's in winning a battle without firing a single shot, but with the simple, quiet strength of your character. If this story reminded you that the greatest victories are often the most personal ones, then please take a moment to subscribe. We share stories just like this every week, stories that remind us all that the human spirit is the most powerful force on earth. Let us know in the comments below what you would have done if you were in Samuel's shoes. Months passed, and the dust of the past began to settle. The Kingston Group, now under the careful watch of Arthur, who had returned to a more hands-on role, was undergoing a major restructuring. Liam, humbled and changed, was sent to work in the company's mailroom, a long and arduous path to rebuild his character and his father's trust. But for Samuel, life had taken on a quiet, beautiful new rhythm. He no longer lived in the small, lonely apartment. He had moved to a small, peaceful home on the outskirts of the city, a place with a garden where he could watch things grow. He spent his days in a quiet, unassuming office, working as a consultant for small businesses and non-profits, using his decades of experience to help people build their dreams from the ground up. He wasn't a CEO, he was something more. He was a mentor, a guide, a silent force for good. One afternoon, a truck pulled up to his house. It was Frank and Maria, their faces beaming with pride. They had started their own cleaning and maintenance company, and their business was thriving. They were no longer just janitors. They were owners, leaders, and most importantly, they were happy. "We came to thank you, Samuel," Frank said, his eyes filled with a gratitude that went far beyond words. "You changed our lives. You showed us that we were worth more than just a paycheck. You showed us that our dignity was our greatest asset." Samuel just smiled, a quiet, knowing look on his face. "You didn't need me to show you that, Frank. You just needed to believe it. You just needed to see it for yourselves." And so the story comes to an end, a quiet victory in a world of loud battles. It's a reminder that true triumph is not a prize to be won, but a lesson to be learned. The millionaire had lost his kingdom to find his humanity. The spoiled son had been stripped of his arrogance to find his purpose. And the janitor, who had lost everything, had found his true identity, not in the money he had, but in the man he had become. The story of Samuel, the humble millionaire, is a testament to the fact that the greatest wealth is not in the size of your house, but in the size of your heart. It's a story about a man who walked away from a world of power, only to find that the most powerful thing of all was a quiet, honest day's work, and in the end, it was not the money that changed his life forever. It was the simple, beautiful, and profound act of being kind.